Good evening, everyone. It's good to be here. We've been enjoying our time here. It's a good time. And I hope that you're enjoying it too. I'll try not to keep you too long tonight. I know it's Saturday night and it's kind of nice to be at home Saturday night, but I'm glad you came tonight. I kind of like humor and puns and that kind of thing, and sometimes it gets me in trouble. I can get too carried away with that pretty quickly. And you know how it is. Sometimes before too long that kind of thing kind of goes downhill and kind of goes in the gutter, and I think we need to watch that. But I still like some, I guess, clean. And I was going to have this ready here to read it, but there's a little story, pun, I guess, basically, but I forgot to. Anyways, thinking about staying here too late tonight, there was this lady in the church. Her name was Mrs. Gladys Dunn, and she was well-respected lady in the church, and she filled in a lot of places, and she would make sure she met the stranger that came in the door or whatever. And one day after the service, she saw someone that she didn't know was there visiting, and he was headed for the door, so she went after him, and she stuck out her hand and she said, "Hi, I'm Gladys Dunn." And he said, "Me too, that's the longest sermon I ever heard." So I'll try not to keep you too long, but tonight, I don't know what you were expecting when you asked me to come here and share. Mike said, just share whatever Lord lays on your heart. He didn't have any agenda. I didn't ask him to try to find out what you guys need to hear or something, so. But what I want to share tonight is not because I think you're not doing this necessarily, but I think it's good for us to be reminded, and it might be something your own pastor feels a little bit hesitant to share maybe, or but what I want to bring tonight is blessing your pastor. And I don't know, you can put whatever title in there you want. I'm not sure what titles you go by, or I don't think that really matters that much. Church leader, elders, I guess my official title is bishop, but I don't really figure that means a whole lot. I mean, whatever. We've been called to different places in leadership and different responsibilities. It's not so much about, when we started our church there, our group, we were together talking about different things, trying to see what we believed, what our practices were going to be, that kind of thing. And this subject came up. Some people thought, well, we should call them elders because that's biblical. Depends which version of the Bible you use. It says bishops, it says elders. And, some people have kind of this thing of, well, bishop just, they got a bad taste somewhere about bishop, and rightly so, probably. I mean, and it doesn't have to be that way. But there's one brother in our church that's pretty much says what he thinks, and he said, we're talking about this, and he said, it really doesn't matter. He said, you can call an idiot anything and he'll still be an idiot. In other words, the title isn't really that important. We can abuse that. We can make good use of it. He's also the one that told me when I was ordained, after the ordination, there was a time for sharing, and he stood up and he said, we're good friends, by the way. He's a bit younger than me, but he said, well, if Johnny ever gets up on a pedestal, I'd be sure happy to knock him off. And you know, he's sort of done that already. And that's good. We need friends like that. We need leaders in the church need friends, our brothers. And thank you very much. Appreciate that. Yeah, there's been some times he come and said, hey, you know, think about this, think about that. And that's good. We need that. That's a blessing. We need to take that the right way. But, you know, if we hadn't been friends and I didn't know him, I might have been a little surprised at what he said. But he had a good thought behind it. So, blessing your pastor, your elder, your church leader, let's turn to 1 Corinthians 9. And like I said, I don't really know your practice here, and I don't know none of your pastors, leaders, whatever you want to call them, said, hey, you ought to preach about this because these people are just, they don't care about us, you know. That didn't happen. So that's not the point. And the point also is, I'm not saying this because I want to be paid to come here, and that, or because my church doesn't do very well at this. They do. They really do. It goes in spurts, kind of, you know. That's okay. But I think sometimes it's something that gets forgotten. Anyways, let's read 1 Corinthians 9, starting in verse 1. And I'm going to read this from the NIV. I think it's just a little bit clearer how it says it, maybe. A little more like the language we use today. Am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus our Lord? And apparently, you know, when we read these letters that Paul wrote, we're getting one side of the conversation here. Apparently, they wrote a letter to Paul and they had these questions, or sometimes one of Paul's helpers, like Timothy or Titus, you know, maybe Paul was sitting in prison and he couldn't go, but he sent one of them to go visit this church. Maybe they came back and they said, these people have this problem, or they're wondering about this, and they wonder what you have to say about that. And so we're kind of looking at one side of the conversation here. We can't read the other letter, or it wasn't saved for us like Paul's letter, or get the whole picture. But apparently there was some people questioning whether Paul was really an apostle, and because, yeah, they had a problem with him. And he's kind of pointing out that he is an apostle, and he has the same right as these other. One place I think he called them super apostles, kind of a little bit sarcastic maybe. Anyway, the people that were questioning him. But he says, have I not seen Jesus our Lord? Are you not the result of my work in the Lord? Even though I may not be an apostle to others, surely I am to you. For you are my seal of my apostleship in the Lord. This is my defense to those who sit in judgment on me. Don't we have the right to food and drink? Don't we have the right to take a believing wife along with us, as do the other apostles and the Lord's brothers and Cephas or Peter? Or is it only I and Barnabas who lack the right to not work for a living? Who serves as a soldier of his own expense? Who plants a vineyard and does not eat its grapes? Who tends a flock and does not drink the milk? Do I say this merely on human authority? Doesn't the law say the same thing? For it is written in the law of Moses, do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain. Is it about oxen that God is concerned? Surely he says this for us, doesn't he? Yet this was written for us. Yes, this was written for us. Because whoever plows and threshes should be able to do so in the hope of sharing in the harvest. If we have sown spiritual seed among you, is it too much if we reap a material harvest from you? If others have this right of support from you, shouldn't we have it all the more? But we did not use this right. On the contrary, we put up with anything rather than hinder the gospel of Christ. Don't you know that those who serve in the temple get their food from the temple, and those who serve at the altar share in what is offered on the altar? In the same way, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel. But I have not used any of these rights, and I am not writing this in the hope that you will do such things for me, for I would rather die than allow anyone to deprive me of this boast. For when I preach the gospel, I cannot boast, since I am compelled to preach. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. If I preach voluntarily, I have a reward. If not voluntarily, I am simply discharging the trust committed to me. What then is my reward? Just this, that in preaching the gospel, I may offer it free of charge, and so not make full use of my rights as a preacher of the gospel. So, typically, in the past, and I don't know how you all do here, but we don't pay our preachers. And I think that's right, that we don't necessarily, have a salaried preacher. But at the same time, let's not ignore the preachers. Let's not act like, they don't matter. Or I think it's pretty clear what Paul's saying here. He's saying, I would have this right. I just didn't use it. He's not saying that it's wrong to be paid or to be. It's not all about money either. Sometimes it's just giving them, making sure they have enough time to spend with their family, or maybe it's making sure they have enough time to spend with God. Maybe they need to go out and spend some time out away from people for a while. That's good for us sometimes. And if a minister is so hard up to make a living, it can be really hard to find the time to spend with the Lord, to spend with other people. Every situation is different. I don't think we can be here tonight and say this is how it should be. But I'm just encouraging you all to make sure that they're not pushed so hard to make a living, whether it's giving them some money once in a while, maybe taking up an offering once in a while. And you might all do that. I don't know that. Some places they do. We have done that already. And I personally have received a lot of help from our church through the time when I got electrocuted and was in the hospital and was off work for 6 months. And I received a lot of help from our church people and lots of other people. And I'm sure I don't know who all to thank for that. So it's not that I feel like I have been neglected that I'm bringing this, but I think it's something we've been so hard against, a salaried ministry type of thing that we've almost went to the other extreme where we just expect our ministers to be able to make it on their own and still have time to preach and still have time to go spend with that brother or sister that's got a problem, just needs someone to be with them. When you're not in it, at least for me, before I was ordained, I definitely did not understand how much time it takes. And yet you still have a family and you need family time. And so I don't think Paul is saying that that a minister should not be paid. In fact, we're going to read some more verses. The other side of that is we're concerned, if that's all the preacher gets paid for is being a preacher, then, or pastor, whatever you want to call it, then he's going to be afraid he won't get paid enough if he doesn't say the right thing. And I suppose there's some truth to that. And I know one situation where a brother was concerned that there would be favoritism. In other words, well, I'm helping you, so maybe then you'll get a return favor. That's possible. Maybe it's good to give through your church or give through some. for a while, it hasn't happened now for a bit, but there was a while this summer, this year, I guess I should say, when we'd get in the vehicle to go home from church, there was some money laying in the center console, and we didn't. I had some ideas, but we didn't know who put it there, for sure. And different times there's a box of food. Well, it's not like we're starving. I mean, you can see that. I'm not starving. But, it's just nice. A little extra. Maybe, I know the one lady especially, I think she had picked out stuff that she figured, we wouldn't buy normally because it costs too much. Some extra stuff, some nice stuff that you wouldn't have to have. And you just don't, until you've experienced it, I don't think you understand really how much that means. It really means a lot. Just the little, it doesn't have to be some big thing. But let's look at some more verses here. 2 Corinthians 11. So there's ways to give, like that the person receiving doesn't even know who it is, and so there's no way they could be giving favors or whatever. And I don't know. I don't know if that's a very good excuse for blocking someone from helping someone else, unless you see that that's actually what's happening. There might be room for that then. 2 Corinthians 11, verse 7. Maybe I'll start at verse 5. This again is addressing this. This is where he talks about super apostles, at least in the NIV it's called that. I do not think I am the least inferior to those super apostles. I may indeed be untrained as a speaker, but I do have knowledge. We have made this perfectly clear to you in every way. Was it a sin for me to lower myself in order to elevate you by preaching the gospel of God to you free of charge? I robbed other churches by receiving support from them so as to serve you. And when I was with you and needed something, I was not a burden to anyone, for the brothers who came from Macedonia supplied what I needed. I have kept myself from being a burden to you in any way, and will continue to do so, as surely as the truth of Christ is in me. Nobody in the regions of Achaia will stop this boasting of mine. Why? Because I do not love you? God knows I do. Anyways, this is not exactly his point here, but in laying it out, in fact, in the King James Version it says wages, I believe here. Yes, verse 8, I robbed other churches, taking wages of them to do you service. So it wasn't like Paul refused money. In fact, he calls it wages here. But it was not from the people where he was at that time. He was receiving money, help, support from other churches so that he could work there for free. And we know that Paul, says he was a tent maker, or I think maybe a little more accurately is a leather worker. Maybe he made other things besides tents. But whatever the fact, he did at times work with his hands. And I think about that sometimes. For me personally, if I only was a salaried pastor and that's all my job was, I think it would be hard maybe for me to relate to my other brothers that, I can't understand their needs. They work hard too. It's not like they have it all easy either. And I think too that, I don't know, I just know myself good enough that I'm afraid rather than using the extra time I might have for God's work, I don't know, I wonder, I think I would probably be selfish with that. And, I don't have to work so hard now, so I can go hunting a little more or fishing or something. And that's not all wrong. I think we need some time to spend out somewhere. It depends on your personality and what you like to do, but I've never got to the point where I felt like, for whatever reason, different reasons, but I would actually like to go spend a whole week out in the desert by myself sometime. Not because I don't like my wife either, and I would miss her, but I don't know, sometimes I like people too. But sometimes I'm just tired of people, and I'd like to just go be out somewhere, no phones, no nothing, and just talk to God and just live in nature a little bit. And I've done a little bit of that, but never for a whole week. And that's a little bit harder than it would have used to been for me, but still pretty sure I could do it. But I guess my point is, I don't think Paul was against pastors, church leaders being supplied, their needs being supplied, being taken care of, even given a wage or whatever, if that's what needed to be. He just did not use that in a lot of instances, or at least not maybe in the church where the area he was at the time. He still was accepting money and help from other churches. Let's look at Philippians 4, verse 10. I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content wherever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. I haven't learned that yet. I want to. I think I learned a little bit of contentment. I think I can. Maybe I should ask my wife. She might know better than me, or my children maybe, or my church family. But I don't feel like I can honestly say I have totally learned this, to be content in anything. But what Paul is saying here is I'm rejoicing because you've renewed your concern for me. And he said it wasn't because you didn't have a concern, but you had no opportunity. And so he says in verse 14, yet it was good of you to share in my troubles. Moreover, as you Philippians know, in the early days of your acquaintance with the gospel, when I set out from Macedonia, not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving, except you only. For even when I was in Thessalonica, you sent me aid more than once when I was in need. And that's what he was talking about earlier when we read in Corinthians there. Not that I desire your gifts. What I desire is that more be credited to your account. I have received full payment and have more than enough. I am amply supplied, now that I have received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent. So apparently Epaphroditus came from the Philippians, from Philippi, and he brought some gifts for Paul. And so there again we can see that Paul was not against receiving gifts from people. He had some needs. He couldn't always work. Sometimes he was in prison, or he was hiding out somewhere for a while, and he couldn't always have a job. And he accepted from others. And I don't know, here's the other thing too. Most normal men, I think, they kind of want to do it their own way. How should I say it? They want to make do for themselves. We don't like somebody to need. It kind of goes against kind of hurts our pride a little when somebody has to help us, you know. Maybe some people are different, but I've always been too much that way, I guess. You know, there's nothing wrong with having that. You need some of that drive, but I can do it myself. Even if I need help, I don't want to admit it, I can do it myself. And when all of when all of your do-it-yourself gets knocked out from under you and you have no way to do it yourself, that's when you're truly ready to accept help. And it's not that I wouldn't have before or whatever, but it's just, yeah, it's humbling. It's very humbling to accept help, and it can be almost harder to do that sometimes than to help other people. We want to always be the giver. Sometimes we have to be the receiver. And so I guess for you in the ministry, you have to be willing to receive that help too. It's not, you have to be willing to take it. And one little note I want to, this is kind of off the subject, but we have this verse here, verse 13, I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. And I don't know if it matters a lot, but that verse gets pulled out of there and used separately. And I think it should stay in the context. I'm not saying it's not true otherwise. God does give us strength to go through hard things. I know, through Christ gives us that strength. But I think what he's really saying here, he's talking about this thing of being content with whatever state we're in. He says, I can do all this through Christ who gives me that strength. And sometimes I was listening to a message recently, and the minister pointed that out, and he said he's seen T-shirts with a gym, some for gym, advertised on it, and then this verse underneath, like I can lift all the weights, because of Christ who strengthens me. I think that cheapens what it's trying to say here. It's talking about this specific thing, and I kind of have a pick about that, and yet I think I do it too. We tend to sometimes pull these verses out and apply them to wherever we want them to apply, and they're probably basically true, what we're saying, but it often helps to read a verse in the context that it's written, and it means more to us, I think. I think it helps us understand the verse better. So we need, and we would think, well, what's so hard about being content when we have plenty? And that's almost harder sometimes. We have a lot, and that doesn't fix it. We want more, even when we have a lot. First Timothy 5:17. Here he says, let the elders that rule well be counted worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in the word and doctrine. For the scripture saith, thou shalt not muzzle the ox that treadeth out the corn, and the laborer is worthy of his reward. Or you could say, the worker deserves his wages. And he brings up this thing again about the not muzzling an ox. It's treading out the corn. In other words, when they used oxen to walk around on the grain, to knock out the grains, and they weren't allowed to put a muzzle on, so he couldn't eat, because he was walking around getting the grain out, and he could eat all he wanted. And we see that in the Old Testament too. And he mentioned that one place we read. The Levites, they weren't given land and expected to, like fields where they could grow things. They received what they ate from was what was brought as offerings to the temple, to the tabernacle and the temple. And I think that's a truth that we should remember. Luke 10, Jesus talked about it too a little bit. Well, he basically says the same thing that Timothy said, or Paul said to Timothy here. But in Luke 10, and he may have mentioned this other places too, I'm not sure. Verse 7. Kind of breaking into a thought there, but in the same house remain eating and drinking such things as they give, for the laborer is worthy of his hire. So this is like Jesus sent out the 72 to go and preach. And he says, let's start at verse 5 and make more sense. And into whatever house ye enter, first say, peace be to this house. And if the Son of Peace be there, and your peace shall rest upon it. If not, it shall return to you again. And in the same house remain. So in other words, the first house in a town they went into, they were supposed to stay there, eating and drinking such things as they give. For the laborer is worthy of his hire. Don't go from house to house. And I'm not sure why Jesus told them that. It probably basically applied to their situation there. But the fact is, Jesus recognized the fact that a laborer is worthy of his hire. Someone that is putting effort into maybe some more than what the rest of the body is. And there's another thing too. Besides, we're talking some about money and gifts and whatever. One of the things that blesses me the most from my brothers and sisters is when I get a text that says, I'm praying for you. That means a whole lot. Or they can call or however they want to. And since I've been here the last couple of days, there's been several of my brothers and sisters that text me and said, we're praying for you this weekend. That's worth a whole lot right there. It doesn't have to be money. It doesn't have to be things. And of course, hopefully you're not just saying that. You're following up on it. And I trust they are. I feel it. I believe it. And that is something that means a lot. So, yeah, think about that. The minister's preparing a message. Sometime Saturday, send them a text. First of all, take the time to pray. But send a text. It's, we kind of take for granted, you probably are, and yet it's nice to be told that. So, that's all I have to share tonight. Lord bless you.